Okay, so today we want to hear about student productions and good practice cases from, well, the student production practice, especially at Stuttgart Media University. We also had a guest scheduled from Filmuniversity, and she caught serious, serious. She's down with fever and cough and really not in the condition to join an online call. So unfortunately, we have to postpone her part to another meeting. This has become a frequent phenomenon during this season of our lecture series. But the more I'm happy that we have 3 projects. One will be introduced by video by Stuttgart Media University. We have here Justin Janssen with the carbon footprint of TV and streaming in Germany. Then Patricia Beek and Jana Halter with green production for a TV show at Stuttgart Media University. And we have Vivian Hoffmann and Maximilian Kabeler, green producing for a short film at Stuttgart Media University. And also in the call is Boris Michalski, professor of production at Stuttgart Media University, Stuttgart Hochschule der Medien. Herzlich willkommen und schön, dass ihr da seid. Well, I think we can start right away, because usually in the first edition of each semester, I would introduce the GEM project, which I can do but without slides. So we have this initiated this lecture series as part of the Erasmus Plus project GEM, Green Education in Media, and we are looking at different perspectives of how to make our craft greener of filmmaking. So we realized that by becoming more and more digital, we actually are living in thriving digital worlds while sitting in concrete buildings and staring on screens. And we somehow want to change that, but we still want to make film. So how to reconcile that? That's one of the missions of the GEM project. And I'm very happy that you joined us today to shed some light on how to do that. So then I would say that we start with Justin Janssen. And the floor and the screen is yours.
All right. Thank you very much. Hope you can all hear me well. Give me just a second to start sharing my screen. All right, this should do. Yes, hello, my name is Justin Janssen, and while we talk a lot about green production today or case studies, getting these contents to the viewers is also a source of carbon emissions, and that's why I'm going to tell you about the carbon footprint of TV and streaming in Germany. And this is more the distribution side of things. Short introduction. I have just finished my master's thesis about 6 weeks ago at Stuttgart Media University, which I did in cooperation with Klimaaktiv. This is also the company, by the way, that developed the green shooting calculator for film production that you may be familiar with. And in my thesis, I compared the energy consumption and carbon footprint of linear television versus video streaming. This is not a case study exactly, but it has been a university project in some way. So I hope this fits in as well today. This work has also been part of the green screening project. If you're interested in that, you can find out more about it on the website. So the objective, in order to compare anything at all, I needed a functional unit. In this case, it is 1 hour of viewing TV or streaming video. This unit is already well established for this kind of comparison. That's why I chose it as well. And before we dive right in, I have some few abbreviations that will pop up here and there in my presentation, just to take you. Whoops, sorry. Just to bring you up to date, OTT is over-the-top content, which basically means video streaming. DTT is what we in Germany call antenna television. IPTV is any form of linear television via the internet, and CPE, customer premises equipment. These are any kinds of boxes or amplifiers that you have in your home, any devices that you need in order to receive TV signals. That's that. So what do we know so far about the energy consumption and carbon emissions of television and video streaming? There have been a few studies that have been published on this topic. They all look at the carbon footprint of streaming, and some compare it to television as well. They are all focused in different regions, and not all of them include linear television. Those who do focus mostly on antenna or DTT. Only the BBC compared multiple platforms, as you can see here, and so did the Low-Card project, as they included IPTV as well. But my aim is to compare all of the platforms, including satellite and cable and IPTV. Why is that? First of all, if we look at the BBC results from 2020, we can get an impression of how linear TV compares to streaming in terms of energy consumption and emissions. But keep in mind, this is only for the UK and only for the BBC. I picked this one as an example here. The emissions depend on the carbon intensity of electricity generation, or so-called national grid factors. For example, the grid factor of the UK is about 30% lower than in Germany, because they have some nuclear energy and mostly burn gas instead of coal. Another thing, as you can see here, is platform penetration. This I had to keep in mind, because it is very different in different countries. While in the UK, satellite DTT, antenna television, is very popular with over 60% of households. You can see that here. In Germany, it's rather unpopular, at only around 6% of households. On the other hand, cable and satellite TV are dominant in Germany, but play a minor role in other countries. So there's a different situation from country to country, and that has to be kept in mind. So to sum it up, why I did such a comparison myself. Firstly, often only one or two platforms were analyzed, mainly antenna television, DTT. Platform penetration is different in Germany, so that must be taken into account. There have been massive efficiency gains in hardware energy consumption in the last couple of years, especially when it comes to standby modes. If you have a TV or set-top box and put it in standby mode, this will consume way less power than it did a couple of years before. And there has been a shift in hardware usage. Nowadays, we need less peripherals because their functionality has been integrated into modern TVs or smart TVs. Most of you probably don't need an extra receiver to get your satellite or cable TV signals, but you can just plug your cable into the TV itself. What I did is basically a PCF, which is a product carbon footprint, with 1 hour of viewing or streaming as the product. And in order to do that, I had to define some system boundaries. So some things that I included in my comparison and calculations, and some things that I didn't include. Of course, it's all the platforms: DTT, satellite TV, cable TV, IPTV, and video streaming or over-the-top content. And for all of these platforms, I looked at transmission energy, CPE energy, and peripherals, and of course, the viewing devices, which are TVs, computers, laptops, tablets, and smartphones.
Just one question. Could you say again what CPE is?
CPE is customer premises equipment. This is any kind of amplifiers or antennas or any boxes that you have in your basement or on your roof at home that you need to receive television signals.
Okay. Thanks.
Or if you watch IPTV or if you video stream, this might be your internet router. Some things I didn't include. First of all, content production and playout. I think we are going to hear a lot about content production later today. I have just looked at the distribution side. So content production was excluded. So were embodied emissions, such as manufacturing, transport, and end-of-life emissions. Also, I didn't include enabling effects. For example, the emissions you could potentially save by streaming instead of driving somewhere to rent a DVD. These are enabling effects, but I didn't include these. Recorded content on a PVR to watch at a later time. And I also focused on households, private households. So I didn't include public TV sets in bars, restaurants, or hotels. Then I did a lot of research and modeling of all of these components on the left side, and I modeled the energy consumption. And I also considered demographics and viewing behavior. How many hours do people watch television each day, something like that. I looked at the prevalence of hardware in households. How many people do have set-top boxes, and what kind of televisions do they have, how big, and stuff like that. I included standby allocation. So when devices are turned off or in standby mode, I accounted for that energy consumption as well. And for video streaming, I used a so-called power model, which was introduced by Jens Malmudin in 2020. This model takes into account that energy consumption is not proportional to the amount of data that is being transmitted, because in reality, when more data is being transmitted, the energy consumption of a network, for example, increases only marginally and not proportionally. So I used this model for the video streaming part of my calculations. Then I ran my calculations through some Python scripts, and these were my results. We have the energy consumption of broadcast or television on the left and streaming on the right. And you see this gray area here, the gray bar. This is the viewing devices. For broadcast, this means the television. And it accounts for around 90% of total energy consumption for 1 hour of viewing television. The most notable differences are in transmission energy between satellite and antenna television, but overall they're pretty much in the same range over here. When we have a look at the streaming side, for example, here the TV bar on the streaming side, for example, if you watch Netflix on your smart TV for 1 hour, the energy consumption is virtually the same as watching linear television. But then the smaller the screen gets, the less energy is being consumed in total. If we take a look at the corresponding carbon emissions, the bars are basically the same, just the scale is different. To sum it up, for broadcast, we have around 107 to 118 watt hours per hour in energy consumption, which correlates to 40 to 45 grams of CO2 emissions, CO2 equivalent emissions. But keep in mind, 100 watt hours per hour, which is just the television set itself. So transmission energy and peripherals and so on have relatively low energy consumption. For streaming, I can say it's 4 to 118 watt hours per hour, which is less than 5 to 45 grams of carbon emissions. But I have to say that the energy consumption here heavily depends on the viewing device. The smaller, the less energy, and the data rate does have a small impact when you're in fixed networks. So when you're at home in your Wi-Fi, it has a small impact. But if you're on the go in mobile networks, the data rate does have a bigger impact. This is due to me using the power model approach, as I mentioned earlier. Yes, so I have some conclusions. If we look at the different platforms, DTT is rather inefficient because, for example, in Germany, we have about 150 transmitters or transmitter towers that use a lot of energy, but only 5% of the households actually receive DTT. And the number of channels is very limited as well. There's only about 40 channels that you can watch, half of which are free and the other half is a paid subscription. When it comes to cable TV, this is also rather inefficient because it uses a lot of bandwidth, because all the TV channels are transmitted at any time, no matter which one you are currently watching or whatever, or whether you're watching at all. They are being transmitted anyway. That costs a lot of energy consumption. Also, you probably have an amplifier that is always on, even if it's not used. Cable TV networks also are being used for cable internet. So theoretically, a transition to IPTV might happen in the future, which is a bit more bandwidth efficient. Speaking of IPTV, this is relatively efficient because only the channel that you're currently watching is transmitted over the network, and this saves a lot of bandwidth. It also has many future potentials. If you think of ultra high definition HDR video, personalized advertising and stuff like that, some of which is already in place today or available today. And last but not least, satellite TV. This is the most efficient one because one satellite or just a few satellites can reach hundreds of millions of homes. The bandwidth is sufficient for ultra high definition or HDR content, but one has to keep in mind that the embodied emissions can be quite high. If you think of rocket launches for satellite deployment, for example, this is a thing to consider. CPE devices, most of the time they are inefficient because they are on always. They are consuming power 24 hours a day, even if you're not watching any television. So some kind of sleep mode would be great for that they only consume power when you're actually watching or using them. When it comes to peripherals, they are hardly necessary anymore today, except maybe for IPTV. Most IPTV subscriptions need an extra set-top box. For example, in Germany, if you think of Magenta TV or Giga TV. But these set-top boxes have become very efficient anyway, especially when it's standby mode. And last but not least, viewing devices. As I mentioned earlier, screen size matters, and so does brightness and panel technology. TVs have become a lot more efficient in the past couple of years, but they also have become bigger, so they still use a lot of energy. Mobile devices, on the other hand, are very small, so they are super efficient. And once again, data rate impact. There's no need to scale down every video that you screen on to 360p or something. This won't save much energy, except when you're on a mobile network there it can make a difference. I have some tips as well. Adjust resolution screen size. You don't need to stream in 4K when you don't have a 4K display. For example, smartphones are almost never 4K displays. Same for HD televisions. Use eco mode or auto brightness on your television. When it's dark outside, you don't have to turn up the brightness of your television to full volume or to maximum setting. And the last one is think before you buy a new TV. Do you really need to buy a new TV? And if so, think of the right size. Oops. Many times people buy TVs that are too big for their living rooms, for example. That's something to consider as well. All right. So one last thing. We have one problem with the calculation and comparison, and that is it's all just average values, or in my case, it's mostly median values. And in order to calculate more accurate carbon emissions for a specific viewing scenario, I developed a little carbon calculator tool for TV distribution and viewing, and I would like to show it to you now. Feel free to try it out yourself later on, or for example, calculate your own setup at home. You can find it under this link. I will switch over to the calculator. Hope you can see it now. This is it. I hope I am in time. This will just take a minute.
Yeah, please go ahead. Just go ahead. Yeah.
All right. We can choose some parameters or set some parameters here for a specific scenario. For example, let's say I have a DTT, which is antenna television at home. Maybe I have an amplifier because this signal isn't strong enough. Maybe I have an old television and I do need an extra receiver for that. Then I have the resolution. I have to set this to HD because antenna television is only distributed in HD in Germany. I can choose my TV set by screen size or power consumption. I choose screen size. Let's say 55 inches might be a good start. This is basically the average screen size in Germany at the moment. I can choose if it's an SDR or HDR display, or whether the content is SDR or HDR. Panel technology. Let's say I have an LED display. And last but not least, I can choose my energy mix, whether I use the national mix of Germany, for example, or whether I have a renewable energy. Once I have set all the parameters, I will get some results on the right. There's a table at the top and a graph at the bottom. And as you can see here, the energy consumption of the viewing device, which is the yellow area over here, is at about 77 watt-hours per hour, which is a bit lower than the average of 100 watts that I mentioned earlier. But this can change quickly once I change any of these settings. For example, if I have a TV that's not 55 inches, but 65 inches, sorry, the energy consumption of the TV itself rises to about 104 watts. Which is 30 watts more. And then I can play around this. I can change any of these parameters. I can set it to renewable energy, which will drastically reduce the emissions down here. And there's also an option to enter values manually if you know exactly what your device's power consumption is. For example, if you know I have a 120 watt television set, you can just enter that and it will factor this in here. Yes, and there's also calculations for the other platforms as well. Yes, that's it. That's my little tour. And that's it with my presentation.
Very well. Thanks a lot. Let's give you a hand.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And well, I must admit that I have a crush on numbers. That might not be the case for everyone, but I think your visualization was a very good example. Actually, I thought, well, I know that my TV set consumes some energy, yeah, and even a lot of, but to see the relation between the transmission, the energy used consumed for the transmission and for the viewing. And that's very interesting because the question is who's in charge here, who has agency on changing something. And I thought the agency was more on the side of the broadcasters and the streamers, but actually we have a whole lot of leverage here to do something about the energy consumption. Well, and even if you have a big TV, turning the brightness down and having maybe inviting some friends to view together might save a lot of energy. So and just to see that is already quite interesting apart from the detailed numbers. We have a question, but maybe if you want to add something to that right now, please do.
No, I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's always the question, who's held accountable for the energy consumption? Is it the TV channel, or is it Netflix, or is it ourselves with our televisions at home? And yes, there are some things that we can do to minimize our footprint or to reduce our footprint, but the options are limited when you have a television set. You are not going to buy a new one if it's just 1 year old just to have a more efficient one or something like that.
Well, given that buying a new one often includes buying a bigger one, the efficiency effect is often void.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another question. A friend of mine is writing her thesis on the optimum distance between your television and yourself when watching, and the best screen size, because there's been a lot of debate on that. What is the perfect size for your living room? What is the perfect viewing distance? Most of the time, people buy televisions that are too big for their living rooms, and this could be something where we could say, okay, let's find out the perfect size for my situation, for my living room, and then this one might be even less carbon intensive.
We have a question by Tuomo.
Yes, sure.
Tuomo, please.
Yes, okay, hello. So this is not a question as such, but I think it would be nice to have that QR code on screen
I can
for a while.
I can post the link into the chat. There's a chat. I don't know.
I don't think we
have
have
it back on if you like to.
Yeah, maybe if put it back on the screen for a couple of seconds. So if you share again, because we don't have a public chat here as far as I know. Yeah, so please note down the link or use a QR code scanner to bookmark this. And you asked in the beginning that you were not quite sure whether this fits. Of course, this fits. So a lot of participating universities in, the participating universities in GEM project are in from disciplines of film production, creative technologies, interactive media, immersive design, and so on. So we are more on the content creation side, but still, I find it very important that we know that we're part of a machine, of a larger system, which also includes the distribution part, which is often overlooked because we deliver our master file and then it's streamed. But it's really interesting also to see the difference between the transmission. So I would have, for example, I would have believed that digital terrestrial television is more efficient than streaming, and now you say it's not. So it's quite interesting because there was a lot of buzz about that. But a lot of effort to keep it up and do the digital switch over to terrestrial television, but it didn't so much work out. While satellite television seems to still have a future after what you've just shown and the purpose. Well, does anybody have any further questions on that? Apart from where's the brightness button on my TV? Okay. Well, then thanks a lot. We are also in contact with RBB and Fraunhofer Focus, and I already heard from that project. So if you make progress in any other, will you join? Klimaaktiv is part of that project, so you will be with that project for quite a while.
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe when we make an update on that project in a year's time or so, we'll invite you again. So it would be nice. And great idea for master's thesis. So congrats.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Patricia Beek and Jana Halter, they can't be with us today, but sent us a video presentation. So we do the video in between, and then we go to real life people again with Vivian and Maximilian. But I think it's good to watch the video right now. Okay, here we go.
Hello everyone, we are Patricia and
Jana.
currently in our 5th semester studying audiovisual media at HDM. Unfortunately, due to our internships, we couldn't be here in person today. So we've prepared this video presentation for you. As an integral part of our academic studies last semester, we were involved in a team project dedicated to producing a television show from start to finish. Our program, Audiovisual Media, offers a range of 6 studio productions, including TV, film, visual effects, and many more.
Simultaneously, we enrolled in the Green Producing module, which focuses on incorporating sustainable practices into media production. As a result, Patricia and I were tasked with overseeing the production of our TV show with the aim of making it more environmentally friendly and ultimately creating a comprehensive project closure report. Today, we would like to walk you through our closure report covering the background and requirements, implementation, and results and achievements of our green production initiative throughout this report.
So, just a quick recap of the TV show itself. We took on a challenge of producing a show from pre-production to live broadcast in just one semester. Our show was centered on the queer community and the contemporary challenges they encounter in every aspect of their life. We were particularly interested in exploring the level of acceptance for queer individuals in our society, and had the privilege of welcoming 5 queer talk show guests and a queer female band for musical support.
Our green producing project for the TV studio production initially posed a challenge, as ecological standards primarily focus on films and less on TV shows. However, the fundamental principles of environmental preservation and sustainable production practices are applicable across industries. Therefore, we chose to use the Green Motion Guide as a starting point and tailored it to the specific requirements of our TV studio production. Furthermore, we encountered some gaps in information required for a comprehensive assessment and analysis of certain environmental impacts of the studio productions. For example, a system for measuring the electricity consumption in our studio was lacking. Additionally, other factors such as the university's sourcing of electricity from non-renewable sources and predefined waste disposal methods were beyond our control.
Our primary goal was to assess the feasibility of obtaining the Green Motion label for our TV studio production. Although we didn't officially submit for certification, our aim was to determine whether our project met the criteria. Furthermore, we strive to create a pioneering template for future green producing reports in the realm of TV studio productions. Another significant objective was to raise awareness about environmental conservation among project participants and stakeholders, including talk show guests and viewers during the broadcast. We wanted to focus on sustainability, promote eco-conscious decision-making, and encourage the adoption of greener practices. Our commitment was to create a more environmentally friendly production and actively contribute to the reduction of CO2 emissions.
In the beginning, we created a preliminary CO2 balance to discern the primary sources of carbon dioxide utilization within our production. Our concerted efforts were then directed towards these hotspots, implementing measures to reduce CO2 emissions. The most prominent hotspots we identified pertain to energy consumption and transportation. Throughout the project, we actively engaged the entire team and provided guidance on sustainable production practices. We created comprehensive tables that collected various data, such as travel to production meetings and the TV studio, the use of technical equipment like laptops, and other relevant information.
Some of the initiatives we introduced during the production included precise electricity consumption tracking software, team-involved tracking tables, separate waste disposal containers, exclusively vegetarian and vegan catering, motivation and encouragement for the use of public transportation, elimination of single-use items, and a shift from elaborate set designs to impressive energy-efficient lighting technology. In the end, we conducted a follow-up CO2 balance to provide an overview of the actual CO2 emissions from our TV studio production calculated after the production's conclusion.
Despite our dedicated efforts to reduce the ecological impact of our TV studio production and promote sustainable practices, we encountered significant challenges. Regrettably, we were unable to attain the Green Motion label, and our actual CO2 emissions exceeded our initial estimates. We attribute the CO2 emissions discrepancy to various challenges, including the initial lack of a precise method to measure studio electricity consumption. Only at a later stage in the project did we establish a precise tracking system which unveiled elevated real-time consumption figures.
We also faced challenges due to university policies, including the use of non-renewable energy and transportation choices like a van. Additionally, issues related to waste disposal and paper use were hurdles. Budget limitations further complicated our ability to invest in green alternatives, underscoring the delicate balance between the sustainability and financial constraints. In total, our experience demonstrates that implementing green producing is a complex endeavor that requires not only technical know-how, but also close collaboration and adaptability. Despite the obstacles, we gained valuable insights into implementing sustainable practices that can serve as a guide for future projects.
We hope that our experiences and insights can be valuable for future project support and address challenges arising from university-related changes. Together, we can make a positive contribution to a sustainable future.
So, yeah, let's give a hand. I did like that. That was very fresh and interesting to see it from the side of the live TV production, because we often look at film productions, but there are some things they have in common, and well, some dedicated challenges. I would say that probably the energy consumption in a live TV production is maybe even easier to track once you have the mechanisms in place, because you have a very fixed time when you run the event. So, and you don't have a large post-production and decentral processing. There were some parallels, like the catering. Actually, well, sometimes, so she mentioned that sometimes money was not available to procure more environmentally friendly solutions, and in some cases, in some cases, it's really you have to invest a bit to be more environmentally friendly. But in other cases, actually, the environmentally friendly choice is also the cheaper choice. For example, with the vegan buffet. The experience of some of my students is that actually the vegan buffet, the vegan option, is always the cheapest, and they could cook very decent meals on quite a few bucks. And making, so even I know that some people can't stand eat vegan over a week or so during especially if they have to work the whole day, but making vegan the standard, and any other vegetarian or meat the option for those who really have to have it, is an easy way to really save money. So it's just an example. So I also often wonder what makes it what makes it cheaper. So where is environmentally friendly measures, where are they cheaper right away, and where do I have to invest? And then it might get cheaper, for example, if you have reusable cups, or so. That's something that where you have to invest if your university doesn't have it. And well, that's another thing, that the university restrictions that were mentioned, or if I'm not mistaken, also at Filmuniversity, we can't decide which energy source to use. We cannot say, okay, we switch to green energy, because it's the state of Brandenburg who decides which contract to use. And as far as I know, currently we're not on green energy. If anybody knows differently, then please tell me I'm wrong, but I think that's the status right now, and I think that's with a lot of public German universities, and that is something where, well, we should really make a change and try to lobby with the ministries, with the respective responsible people to change that, because that would actually be an easy choice. Well, I don't know whether it's easy to implement that or not, but it's something obvious to do. So are there any comments on that, people? Well, something where you say, well, I can relate to that, or where you just have something else to add from the domain of TV shows before we go on to the next presentation? Well, I got one more thing. Sorry. I noticed there was very little material used. That is, when we do shows, we don't do shows often at Filmuniversity, but often we have a quite elaborate setting for the studio, and the decoration is quite, well, takes quite some effort to do, and it's thrown away right after the shoot. And using sustainable material or reused, recycled materials, alternative materials to build these sets is something that our students have been looking into. And although it's still a pity that you throw away all this after shooting, you can significantly decrease your carbon impact by experimenting with reusable or recycled materials that, for example, using a special cardboard, which is very light cardboard structures instead of wood, for example, and all that. Yeah, but before I tell you all, that comes to my mind to the aspect of TV shows, which I really like. I would like to go on to the next presentation, and I already see Vivian and Maximilian with green producing for a short film. So please, your mic.
Yes, thank you. So you see everything?
Yes.
Great, then I will start. So hello again. We wanted to present you our project Kopfkino and its screen producing process today. So that's on the one hand, me, I'm Vivian. I finished my master's studies in corporate communication this year with the focus on film production, and I was one of the green consultants of our project together with Max.
Yes, that's me, Max Capella. Yeah, I also worked on the project. I'm doing my bachelor right now at the HDM, and with focus on film production in the audiovisual media program. So I guess we will see the video without audio, but we will just start and show you a quick, way where you can see the final project. So you have a imagination. It's basically an ad for cinema. So we'll just see. I mean, it's quite laggy for me, at least. So I think it's online as well. Just search for Kopfkino HDM. It's a quite nice advertising short film about the imagination and the effect of cinema for the audience. Sort of a hero journey, and yes. Maybe
do you want me to share it from? I got it now. Do you want me to share it from my screen? Then we have it with.
I mean, yeah. If
let's try it.
Got the time, yeah.
It might also be that it looks like a slideshow, but it's only 2 minutes, so it's worth a try.
Kannst du es ihm senden, weil du das Video hast, Max?
Ich habe es doch
Ja,
online.
ja, genau.
Okay. Perfekt.
Ja.
Okay.
For me, at least, I don't have audio.
No, me neither.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, now the people know, they can look it up.
Yeah.
It's not much dialogue or something. I think everyone has like a sort of pictures in their mind how it went. Yeah, maybe I'll just continue with the outline of our quick talk, and we will. Well, let's wait for the presentation
Let me
again.
open.
All right, so we will start by pre-planning, then going a bit through the target calculation we did with the CO2 calculator, and then there we had some determination of the hotspots, which lead to recommendations for the shooting, and we'll have a quick look at the actual calculation and the shooting and the analysis, and then we will round up with some learnings. And yeah, I will just give it up to Vivian for the first topic.
Yes, so the first topic is the pre-planning. As you might have seen in parts in the video, there have been some obvious challenging points for sustainability. One was a scene with the ocean, which has been actually deleted from the script, not only because of sustainability problems, but we wanted to mention it here because actually the script is already the first point where the green consulting and the optimization process starts. Yeah, because there you can already delete some things. The second one is the sand needed as production material for the desert. And we decided to reuse it to avoid waste. So we decided to store it in the university or for future productions, or to use it to build new sandbags for shootings. And last but not least, the obvious point is the jungle. We decided, for example, to borrow the plants from a local garden center close to the university, so the delivery of the plants didn't cause lots of emissions either due to the short distance, and of course the plants could be reused. And yeah, then in the pre-planning we had meetings from an early stage on with production and direction to ensure that they were informed and that we all had the same goals. Like, it was also useful to give them a first overview over the green motion standards, possible measures, and our involvement during the shooting, as well as for them to explain us the script and to ask any questions. And from that point on, we had like a permanent communication with the head departments, later on as well an email, for example, with detailed information and recommendations specified for each department. After that, we only communicated with the production as intermediate communicators, so we avoided any confusion by talking to many different people. And yeah, last but not least, the collecting of CO2 relevant data since the beginning, which was really important. For example, we provided as well, like the two before of us, a table of distances and current consumption for the crew to fill. For example, from the beginning, they had to fill how many hours they used, which laptop or which device, and they filled in the distances of any journeys. So that was important. So nothing has been forgotten, and they had time to fill it out and were reminded each weekly by the producer. Yeah, and then we already go on to the target calculation. we used the MFG CO2 calculator, and we have, like on the left, you can see an outtake from our final report with the main sections of sustainability, like energy, travel and transport, catering, and the use of material. So here the chart for each, or for target and actual, are still the same, as we till this point only had the data for the target calculation. So in total, we had an estimated amount of 4,635.11 kilograms CO2. And for this calculation or estimation, we collected like each little expected CO2 emission in every step of the production, any rides, use of material, electricity, heating, emissions, and so on. And collaborated therefore with the producer, who gave us some estimated numbers, as he already knew before the happening, let's say like this, before any rides, where things were borrowed from, which journeys had to be done, who was when on the set. And so the collaboration with the producer was really necessary and useful to collect any kind of kilometers and journeys. And yeah, that led us to our first estimated results, with which gave us a possibility to detect further hotspots and optimization potential, which leads me to our next slide. For example, we have the catering as one of our hotspots, regarding, for example, to the high percentage in comparison to the total amount of CO2 emissions. Catering was still like on the top. Another hotspot was the commute of the main actress, where a local actress or maybe a stay at an eco-friendly hotel would have been, or would have saved at least some carbon. This wasn't possible as it was like a non-budget project from student production, which is the same with the undilatory current in studio, which has already been mentioned before. Like our university has like just the undilatory current, so there was no opportunity to change that by the students. But nevertheless, we had some recommendations for optimize or minimize the CO2 emissions further. There were, for example, we recommended to have 2 veggie days instead of 1, as it reduces more like the catering emissions that we had, or that were relatively high in our production. Another one was the labeling of the bottles, so they didn't need extra cups or even the dishwasher, and a detailed waste separation, as the one of our university was not optimal as well. And last but not least, we ensured a permanent feedback with the producer to answer like questions, give further instructions, and keep each other just up to date during the shooting, which Max will explain now a bit more detailed.
Our job there at the actual shooting was like basically visiting the set during production, controlling, answering questions, monitoring, and just recording all the data. By the way, this is actually not the most time-consuming part, so you didn't have to be on set all day. And after this, after you have all the exact data, it's basically the same procedure as the target calculation. Now you have actual data. So for example, you have exact current data, which is shown on the next slide. And then you also have like sort of, for example, a trip list where you have exact mileage. Quick example for the current data. In our film studio, it was pretty convenient to track the current data, because all of the power in our studio is coming through one device, and we can track it there. And then there comes the final evaluation report and the analysis. We were checking all points determined from the MFG. This is the company who the CO2 calculator and the label is from. and we checked everything that was necessary to obtain the Green Motion label. In theory, because yeah, we're just like not professionals. We're not professionals in this topic, and we just checked whether the criteria has been fulfilled, and if not, why not? And yeah, argued a bit about the causes and stuff. Yeah, of course there were points that could have been improved, like for example, the local actress was not possible, which sort of did a bit of mess to our CO2 calculation. And yeah, the green electricity, we talked about this. In our university, it is as well just like a mixed current, so not really environmental friendly. Yeah, but in the end, we theoretically achieved the label. Our final CO2 calculation is 2,956 kilograms, which is almost 1 ton less than expected. And then I will just give you a quick overview about our learnings. First of all, communication is essential, especially before, but also during and after the shooting, to get all the data easily. For example, we recommend Excel spreadsheets for monitoring and tracking, because there you have like this interactive tool via cloud where every crew member can just easily type in his rights. We also have some feedback for the CO2 calculator from the MFG. It's a quite new tool to calculate, and it's great and saves a lot of time, but it can improve in some points. For example, there was no option to enter saved food into calculation. We worked with a bakery who gave their last day sandwiches and stuff for us. So it's like an argumentation how you should count the food who would have been thrown away anyway. And lastly, it's important to keep the crew up to date to motivate and track their CO2 values even after the shoot. For example, we used weekly sheets for this. In conclusion, such a small production will not make a huge difference in the worldwide CO2 consumption, I think. But sustainability is just too important and too easy not to include it on that. And it takes a lot of time, but it's quite simpler than you think, and it's actually a lot of fun in the end. And perhaps it can inspire a change in the people's thinking. So we thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you. And we hope you could take some things away from our presentation. And if there are any more questions, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot. While we're waiting for questions, please raise your virtual hand if you have a question. One question for you from me. So you're all studying the same program, but when you're going into to make a film, so you spread into department roles, and I could imagine, well, in the beginning, everybody's eager, we're doing green shooting, but then it might happen that you become consumed into your department roles and act differently by the role you're in. Did you experience that, or was that not an issue?
Yeah, of course, not everybody is super motivated to put the CO2 values at their first priority. Of course, you have to always find a compromise between the creative aspect and the CO2 or the environmental stuff. At this point, we had the pleasure to work with a very good producer at this project who was very good at communication, and we didn't have any serious discussion points. So it was quite simple and easy for us to implement the stuff needed to for the staff who won't restrict a lot of creativity, but also get the production on a good CO2 point.
Yeah, I think it's when the head departments are in the boat, like we say, they're on the same page, that they also wanted to save like emissions and they want to get the label, they are enough motivated to get it through to the rest of the team. And so there is no one who comes up and says, oh, I'm not I'm not feeling like it today. So they're all like doing just because they agreed to do it. And I think therefore the early meeting is so important, because then you already give a good overview of what it means, and of course that it means also some extra work, but then everyone knows from the beginning, and it's not like shocked at some point of the shooting that they have to do like 3 hours extra work. Like, yeah.
I think also like every or a lot of students at our university, including professors, are very progressive in thinking, and like for a studio production like this, it's not super special to do the CO2 calculation and everything. So it's like, yeah, included in mostly every production at HTM.
One question that I find relevant for student productions is because, well, usually you always have too few hands to get the production done. So it's really a question of can you afford having people separate, setting aside a person really to do the green consulting and just take care of that. So how was that in your project? Which role or roles did you have? Were you exclusively for this the green consultant job there in the project, and how large was the team as a whole?
Yes.
Actually, we were like external green consultants. So our we visited the lecture green consultant at the HTM, and then we're sort of mixed with the studio production, which is a completely different lecture. And therefore, yeah, it's true. There are not enough people on set, especially in the small teams. Like we were maybe like 12 or something. There was not one person from the team doing green consultant, so it was a good collaboration. And yeah, so this is how we can make these green consultants even in a small team.
Yeah, and I think it was really useful that there are some objective parts who can like tell it from an objective point to each department, because it's more easy, I think, than if you're from one department and telling other departments what to do. So as we had in like kind of objective role, and we're communicating mainly with the producer later on, and gave like specified information for each department, but they could like choose what of that stuff that we, or the input that we gave, which they could use for the production, or which wasn't useful in their case. So
yeah, I mean, it's a green consultant. Yeah, it's a green consultant. You consult things. It's not like you say this, you have to do this or you have to do that. But in the end, we're like counting every points together and then decide whether or not the green motion label is achieved or not. And they did.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, just considering whether this could be a recommendation that, so in this case, so 2 different courses at universities kind of work together, and you were not part of the project. So, so I'm just thinking about how this could be realized in other settings, for example, at Filmuniversity. But the general idea of having people as green consultants who don't have really stakes in the project as such might be a very good hint, because if you're involved in the project, even if you are set aside for this job exclusively in the beginning, when they're short of help, you might get sucked in and end up doing totally other tasks. So this seems to be a good concept and seem to have worked quite well. So, well, but yes. Maybe you also want to join our production as external consultants. I'm just
yeah.
If you invite us.
I think it's very important to have like this neutral role to not, if you have to find compromises, it's very hard to, for example, be in a creative and a CO2 part as well, or an environmental part. And one thing I want to add is, if you do the CO2 calculation once and go through the whole process, like from now on in any of my productions, I will probably do some rough CO2 calculation. It's like if you do it once, it's very like it's not that hard. It's very simple, but you will just have it in the back of your head. And yeah, I think also a lot of our crew did this as well, and so it's not an invest in the particular production, because I mean, like 3 tons of CO2 is not that much compared to other, but it's like it's start of changing the people's mind, and I think that's the main good point of it.
Well, I think it's still an amount that we save, like.
Yeah, well, I think this is well, we had this question a while ago in the last semester, where it was also about the general CO2 impact of the film production as a whole is nothing compared with like the global building industry or construction industry, but actually it doesn't matter how much you save. It's about how much can you save from what you actually consume for this very activity. And so it's twofold. One thing is, well, every bit counts, and if you can save 30% with your production, you should do that. It's 30%, even if it's 3 tons or so, I don't know. And the other thing is, of course, what Vivian said, it's about the mindset of people, that if you're aware of this in the small production, you will be aware of this in the large production. You will be aware of this aside from productions. Well, maybe if you buy your new TV and you think, oh, hey, actually I could save 30% energy consumption if I take the 55-inch display instead of the 65. 55 is still insanely huge for me because I'm still at 32. There I'm doing quite good. Not so in other realms, but there, well, my TV set is small. Yeah, so just saying, it's this work. It's not about the amount we save. It's really about the pervasiveness that we try to save energy wherever and whatever we do. So
I think. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, please.
I just think it's also like with the student production, you don't see a lot of points which we, for example, didn't have, but which you can, like save in other productions. Like we didn't have, of course, any flights. We didn't have any diesel generators or anything like that because we just produced in studio. But these are things that make like a huge difference in bigger productions, for example, which can like easily save a lot of emissions.
No. Well, that was a very good insight in your process and a successful project. Does anybody have some last questions? Well, then I think if you want to have the last word, you can. No, I can't see the last word to anything. So if you say something now, I would say something after that. So, but still, if any last thoughts are on your mind, please let them flow.
I mean, just thank you for the invitation, and yeah, this was interesting to talk.
Keep saving emissions.
All right,
we will do.
Okay.
So
thank you.
It remains. Thanks a lot for your presentation and the charming talk. So we have one more presentation in this series, not today, but the series will also continue in springtime with 3 new lectures. But as the last lecture by Lena Giesecke on the energy consumption and implications of post-production had to be cancelled due to COVID. We decided to still hold that in the winter term, and it will be on on January 9th, Tuesday, January 9th, same time, that's right? Okay, Thanks, Sophie. And if you follow us on Eventbrite, you will receive a notification. I think we still didn't quite figure out, but maybe I'm speaking for myself. I think Sophie now knows a lot more about Eventbrite.
I think everyone who was registered for the event got an email yesterday. I hope so, at least. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and if not, well, you can reach us via the GEM website. Yeah, you have to Google that film. You have to look for, what was it? Kopfkino HDM, Kopfkino HDM. Well, it's German. I don't know. I would like to write it in the chat, but somehow I can't. KOPFKINO and HDM. Those are the letters. Well, I hope one or the other one got it. So, yeah.
All right.
And
So thank you.
Thanks
again.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks to all of you. And I wish you a nice evening and a nice Christmas time. And I hope that we meet each other again on January 9th for Lena's talk on energy or on sustainability in post-production.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.